conversation for today. Of course, there are some big developments taking place in terms of e-governance legislation. And so we want to start the process of breaking it down for us to all understand. So here we have with us the Minister of Youth, Sports and E-Governance, Kevin Bernard. And we're joined by Alexia Peralta, who is the Director of E-Governance and the Digitalization Unit.
Morning.
Good morning.
Good morning to you all. It's a pleasure to be back on Open Your Eyes. It's been a while.
Yes, well, we are happy to have you here and definitely to be able to talk about some of the recent developments. So let's get into it. There were 3 bills. I know Friday's House meeting, we talked a lot about what took place with the super bond and now the blue bonds. But let's talk about where we're moving with e-governance.
One of the things, as you know, Marlene, is the government's commitment to digitize services in government is a very critical component of Plan Belize. And in order for us to achieve digital transformation, and I know Alexia will continue to speak on what that means and all that details, is that we need to make sure that there is the legislation, the teeth, that will allow us to do so. And these 3 major legislation, there's 2 other legislation that was passed, which the Prime Minister presented. But these 3 that we presented and was read for the 3rd time in the House, the Data Protection, the Public Sector Sharing Bill, and the Electronic Evidence Act Bill, gives ability, gives us the ability and give the people the ability to move into that digital economy, that digital world. You know, we have always heard of many of the obstacles and the bureaucracy that happens. A lot of paperwork have to go through in many instances. We're trying to change that. And if we are to move ahead with technology, we move ahead along with the world, this is the way to go. You know, we need to make the ease of doing business in this country from all angles. Citizens, and our focus is mainly on our citizens. Both those who come to this country, but at the same time making services more accessible to a general populace. And so it's critical that we ensure that we pass these necessary legislation that will speak of digital signatures, electronic transfers, and if we go through that, the legislation one by one is a lot to digest. But really, these are the framework that has to be laid down in order for us to achieve the goals we are setting out in terms of our national digital agenda that we want to launch.
So it's a step-by-step basis. My question has to do with what's the level of consultation that takes place with other ministries, because they are directly impacted by the passing of these new legislations.
Well, let me ask Alexia to get into that part, because I know she had been working with the EDC for some time, working on many of these legislations. So I will ask her to comment on the consultation that took place, and I will also add later in terms of what we're doing now to further communicate inter-ministry discussions that needs to be had. No? So.
Right. Thank you, Minister. So yes, certainly, you know, with the introduction of any new bills or the modernizing of any new bills, it's always vital for us to be able to consult, not just within government, but outside government, because many of these bills will impact us individually as a citizen of the country. So these bills have been through an extensive process of consultation. It's taken over a year now, and it was done really and truly under a project that was executed by the Inter-American Development Bank and coordinated to the Economic Development Council under the Office of the Prime Minister. And it began in 2018. So we're about almost 3 years in ensuring that this bill has really considered everybody's viewpoint. We consulted with the banking sector, with the legal practitioners, with citizens, with the public service, all to ensure that the bills and the provisions really ensure that we're not creating any further obstacles for anyone, and of course ensuring that we're always protecting the rights of our citizens. And that's the essence of these bills, ensuring that we're now giving citizens the right protection as they begin to interact more on the digital realm. I mean, today we interact on our phones every single day. It's part of us. We can't do anything without it. So we need to ensure that we're protecting our citizens as they continue to evolve, and as we as government continue to transform ourselves in using these digital technologies.
Let's talk about the privacy issue. I think it's interesting because the laws happen now, but there's kind of been a small bit of digitization taking place in little nooks and crannies. The BHIS is a great example. The health, I can't remember the specific name, Belize Health.
Belize Health Information
System. Yes, thank you. Where your data is stored kind of in a hub, and it can be accessed from other places, which is great if I get sick in PG because they know my treatment here in Belize.
Right.
But it's also looking at the lack of protection that exists for my data that is now in this platform. Let's talk about how you find that these types of privacy issues can be mitigated by new legislation.
Right. I think that's an excellent really issue that you have highlighted, because that was one that I was going to mention. Yes. So ideally, the data protection bill is meant to strengthen the data protection regime in country in how we use personal data, the processing of that sensitive data, and one of those sensitive data is being ideally your biometric data, your health information. How does a citizen have the right to ensure that that is their data, and to ensure that all the protections are being put in place for them? So the lawfulness and consent of the processing of that information is there, that the citizen has the recourse, the legal recourse, in the event that their right is violated. The data protection bill really offers all of that provisions in place, and it's based off of the GDPR, which is an international regulation on data protection, as well as the public sector data sharing bill, which now will ensure that as government, as we share information, we're doing so within that data privacy law. So even if we're sharing information of any citizen that's collected through any system, it is still following that data protection right. So we're now putting in place all of those building blocks to ensure that we address some of these concerns that citizens do have, and we understand that. So these bills are critical and important for us as citizens, for our protection to be there, but as well to facilitate the data sharing. Because like you said, imagine if you were in Dangriga and you have a medical emergency, but your information cannot be attained, then how does that health practitioner know how to really attend to you? So those are some of the issues that we want to ensure that are addressed, and ensuring that we can facilitate the flow of information.
And critically to what Alexia has mentioned to Marlene, when I read and I discussed some of the details of that bill, when you look at the public sector data sharing, it repeatedly stresses there, and I think it's clause 4 and clause 6 of the bill, speaks of health and private information, personal information that must be protected. And that is the reason why it was also stressed in the data protection bill, because that was one of the big concerns. How am I going to be protected in terms of my health information? You know, while certain information should be available in terms of your health, it must be protected. It's that person's privacy, and so the bill speaks of that very clearly. So I must say that when you look at these things, and talking to some of the, in fact, I spoke to a senator yesterday, and over the weekend I was speaking to a business person, and they've been saying, you know, we've been needing this legislation for some time. So I think we're in the right direction. We're moving in the right direction, and in terms of these major legislations.
And you know, apart from the protection, since we're on the topic of the public sector sharing, in general, I think that is a really interesting bill. And you know, I guess for the benefit of our viewers, you could describe what are the main aims behind the bill, and how the legislative provisions sort of achieves those goals.
So the public sector data sharing bill is, as a country, we're actually one of the few in the region to have a public sector data sharing bill. And the essence of that bill is to facilitate the sharing of information between government entities, trying to achieve the once only principle. And what that really means is that, let's say I go to the Vital Statistics Unit, where they hold all my birth data, but I also need a service from the Ministry of Health. But some of that piece of information is already collected from me at the Vital Statistics. So having the public sector data sharing bill will allow that sharing of information within a protected regime to ensure that key sensitive data is being protected, that the right of citizen is being protected, but at the same time, it's addressing the concerns that citizens have of every single time I go to a government entity, I need to supply my information all over again.
Right.
So that is really the essence of it, to ensure that while we're sharing information, we're complying with a citizen's data protection right, and to ensuring that we are utilizing data as a resource for policy making. So the more accessible data becomes for all government entities, the more we can begin to use these data to make decisions. And that's what a digital government is about. It's about beginning to be data driven, making policy making based on evidence. So it's beyond just creating and digitalizing services. It's about looking at a very holistic picture of how, as a government, we transform the way we operate.
Yeah, and it also, I mean, it goes back to one of the core elements of moving towards the digital era, which is just the ease of doing business.
Right.
You know,
Right.
rather than jumping from Vital Stats, the passport office, to I don't know where else.
Yeah.
Police,
criminal
Police,
record and all
right.
these things.
yeah. So all of these things can be maintained. Let's take it back to another institution. When you think of things like Sito and their investigations that they do and monitoring that they do, how does this complement their work?
Well, I could just probably explain the role and function of Sito.
Yes.
Sito, being the Central Information Technology Office, is really mainly an IT arm of the Ministry of Finance.
Yes.
They are there to more deal with the smart stream and payment options of government. While our unit now, the e-governance and digitization unit, is tasked to ensure that we move the digital part of government services. So Sito does a lot of the hosting, the protection, but we have to look at cybersecurity, we have to look at all of these things. And so as we go developing these changes, these are the things that we have to start to implement more and strengthen, because there's a cyber crime, there's a cyber crime act. We may have to also look at how we enhance that bill. But definitely Sito plays a significant role in terms of being the, you would say, like, for example, I mean, being the cloud for government data. So a lot of the different departments or ministries will normally host their hardware there, and all the data are protected there. So our unit work closely. We'll have to work closely, and we are continuously working closely with Sito to ensure that those things are, the interoperability is there, the connections is there, but we have to ensure that every other ministry is also connected to that network. So Alexia could probably add more in terms of that discussion that they have been having from a technical standpoint.
Yeah, certainly. But it's beyond Sito, really and truly.
Right.
Looking at all ministries now as the custodians of data, because the data isn't ours, the data is for the citizen. And that's what the data protection bill really highlights. You know, it's your data, you are the owner of that data, the government is the custodian. So the public sector data sharing bill actually also speaks to the principles in how we should manage information, how we should share information. The data protection bill talks about the processing, how do we process those within certain principles. But beyond that, when you think about the risks that always exist with having information available, of course, is where the electronic evidence bill now comes to strengthen that legal framework. Because today, again, we're more connected, we face more risk of cybercrime. But at the same time, we have to be able to supply the legal practitioners with the right tools to be able to present in proceedings. So the electronic evidence bill strengthens the use and regulation of digital evidence. And digital evidence could be a personal document on a computer, an instant message, an email. All of those things are digital evidence, which
A
will
social
now
media post?
correct,
Yes,
which
that's
which
right.
will now be admissible in court as it relates to any cyber crime that would be presented. So it also strengthens our judiciary system.
And that's what I found interesting, because I can see this tying so closely to one of the common issues that we talk about, which is cyberbullying.
Right.
So if somebody threatens my life online and says, you know, watch out, whatever, I have evidence online.
Correct.
Is that now admissible based on this bill?
Yes.
Well, the bill speaks of it, but you also have to be able to understand that in the bill, the person taking the matter has to prove
Yeah.
the legitimacy of that
Yes.
that post. So there it's also making it's a very tight bill, but yes, that will be something that you will be protected through these legislation. Yeah.
And looking at the landscape that we're in, I know that there's a whole lot of catching up when it comes to just living in this digital world. And the challenge is that we have a mixed community. You have people who are still very traditionalist and they use minimal digital services. And then you have some, and I think there's no greater example than the recent electronic wallet that was launched.
Right.
You know, this great uptick from one percentage, and then the rest are like, oh, well, I don't know, is it safe? So how do you manage that from an e-governance standpoint, where people will still want some services traditionally, and some are just hoping, listen, can I just do it on my phone?
One of the things Alexia will add. One of the things we have constantly have this discussion, and I'm totally aware. And one of the key things that we have to ensure, if we are going to digitize services, government services, then we also simultaneously, as a country, as a government, need to look at how do we ensure that the citizens have access to good internet service, provided not only at a district level, but at the rural communities. And we are looking at different options on how we can get these things to our people. So as a government, we have to look at the investments. We have to talk to these service providers to ensure how are they expanding, how are they going to be working with the government strategy in terms of making internet access available to every citizen in this country. Now, as it relates to those who are traditional, now, when we look at the digital, I'll take vital statistics, for example, a key area, department that needs to be digitized. And we are working closely with the Attorney General's ministry to see how quick we can get this process going. Alexia today will be meeting with people from that ministry to continue the dialogue and set out their plans, the implementation plan. Now, if we have to digitize vital statistics, it's wonderful. It sounds great.
Yeah.
On the front, we need to make sure that there are training, there's access, there are people that have access to the services, but there are individuals that still indeed may say, you know what, I don't know how to use this thing.
Or I don't want to.
Or I don't want to use this thing. So I'm sure that there will still be some need for us to, at some point, to be able to still have a form of that manual process to be able to maybe may not be in the fact that that person will go to vital statistics still. But if you have digital labs, for example, set out in the different communities where somebody from government, an officer, is available to be able to assist that person to fill out the processes, those are the things that we're saying when we talk about accessible to individuals. Because if you're going on a digital platform, you have to be able to make sure that it works. I could see where, like land, for example, Ministry of Natural Resources, a land application, that simultaneously can have both for the beginning. But your end result is that your goal and your vision is to make sure that everything goes digital.
It's like a transitional
so we have to look at that transition indeed.
I mean, we see it. This even with the media. You have people who are still using antenna. You have people who are relying on cable. You have people who want it on Facebook. And then you have people who say, no, I want it on YouTube. It's the different layers, and we try to meet all. My question is, how do you meet all?
Well, there are different approaches to it. One of those, of course, is, as the minister explained, closing that digital gap. So ensuring that there are right training tools for our citizens to learn what it is to use a platform, the technology, because many times we're afraid of the unknown, of not knowing how to use these devices. So being there to support what we then call, closing that digital gap, providing the right support for citizens at all levels, so senior citizens, youths, even youths at risk. So there are all levels that we need to really focus on, and we need to partner with key entities within our ministry as our Department of Youth Service, for example, but even outside with the Ministry of Education, for example, with the Ministry of Human Development. So there are various partnerships. But besides that, from a digital service perspective, we need to ensure that we're building services that are user driven. So understanding the customer, understanding the different users of these services, and how do we facilitate it and make it easier for them? How do we ensure that it's a platform that isn't confusing for them? So those are elements too that you have to consider, that we consider a priority to ensure that when we're designing a new services, that it's really what the citizen needs, their perspective, and understanding that these happen at a phased approach. So maybe having a citizen submit an application via PDF is a big step for them. So maybe immediately jumping them into doing a full online platform might be too much. So it's understanding the culture and the context that we really live in, and trying to design those services based on that. So the culture is one of the most important items that we always speak about.
Of course, yeah.
And especially in Belize, understanding the different cultures in different areas, and even thinking about, designing based on different languages, etc. So there are different elements that we can look at.
And I think your example of like a hub or assistance unit, for me, it took me back to when the US visa system went online.
Right.
There were all these businesses that were created to kind of assist people who couldn't do the process alone online.
That's right.
And maybe an e-governance type satellite hub is set up to assist those who may need help.
And this is why I mentioned that, because it will be very critical as we start to roll out these services digitally, that those platforms are available for the citizens to be able to access. But I also wanted to touch on something very critical, because we're talking about the citizen accessing. Now we have to also understand that we're talking about government service. So the culture within the public service also has to change. We need to fix that too. So the public servants need to also get up to speed in terms of the use of technology and the services that we want to implement on a digital platform using the concept of digital transformation. So it goes both ways.
Who
there's a lot
offers
of
that training?
Well, that was going to be my next question. So we jumped the gun a little bit, but I wanted to know what the uptake was like and what the response has been like among the relevant people in government who are going to be having to be the ones dealing with this sort of technologies. Is the response so far positive?
Before I get into the response, and Alexia will do that because she's the one directly communicating. This is why the internal interministry dialogue is very critical. We'll be meeting with the Ministry of Health, we'll be meeting with the Ministry of Education, we'll be meeting with the Ministry of Natural Resources, the Public Service, Ministry of Finance, because we have to make sure that everybody is on the same page. It's critical. Public service being also one of the main discussion areas that we will have this discussion. And as we setting out the national agenda, the digital agenda, which we will soon be presenting to the Prime Minister, I must say though that the Prime Minister is very much committed in making sure that this government digital transformation goes and is effective. And it's all about promoting open government, good governance, and it restores some trust in the public service for the people and citizens. So that dialogue has to continue. And Alexia can point out to the many responses that has been coming in terms of when she has been reaching out to these various ministries.
Right, I think prior to COVID-19, the response and uptake was slow because it wasn't seen as a necessity. We're so accustomed to using paper, and that paper is the way to do my job. But now with COVID-19 and having to have that social distance measures, there's certainly a shift in culture in the public service, and now the need to use technology. As a matter of fact, I think I'm flooded with requests of different ministries interested to see how can we transform our ministry, how can we begin to use these types of technology, and going back to the most basics, for example, using like Excel, using like Word. So using these types of technology.
Fillable forms.
Yes, fillable forms, correct. Microsoft Forms,
Locked
surveys.
fillable forms.
Right. So these are things that I think we would not have really seen be a highlight until, unfortunately with COVID-19, it's a need now. And as they always say, right, the invention,
the mother of invention.
The mother of invention is necessity.
Yeah,
Correct.
right.
So I think that that's one of the key aspects here, and certainly there's been greater uptake. But with that, there is the need to continuously do a lot more training. Because again, like I said, having the knowledge of what a tool is, but having the knowledge to use that tool effectively is really different. So we are planning to do additional trainings within the public service to ensure that we are providing everybody the right tools to be able to use these.
And efficiently, because
Yes.
data entry
Yes.
can be time consuming.
Yeah.
So that's one of the questions I have. I don't know if you're tackling it as yet, but what about all the archive
That's what I
data?
think too.
What about the stuff that's already only on paper that will eventually have to be entered into new systems? Are you going to do a start from here and move forward, or are you going to take some time to kind of get the backlog into systems?
Well, I have my own view on it, and I know that I've discussed this as a.
This
as
is always a challenge.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think, and I will go back to vital statistics as a perfect example. I love a lot of these files, as you know. In fact, when you looked at the news in earlier years, you have reports of where some files are people applying for about paper, they can't find the records and all these things. So there's a challenge there. But I believe that if we are going to move into a digital era, we need to start from somewhere. There can be two things happening at the same time. You start the digital process, while in the back end, people are updating those records. And so, because if we are to wait for us to update all these records and get them on a digital platform, and they don't like to use the word platform, but on the digital service here, then you're going to waste a lot more time. We are going to talk about maybe down 5 years to get where we want to. So, for me, from my perspective, I think vital is critical. And so you always use that as an example. So we have to find a way that we can have some digital service to that department and other departments, while at the same time, in the back end, people are updating those records to ensure that when we get there. And so reaching out, doing these mobile clinics in terms of getting access and data is also something that has to be discussed and looked at in terms of when we move these services forward. So I totally support that simultaneous move in terms of having something digitally and at the same time getting those manual records up to date.
Right. I think we, as a country, we have a lot of catching up to do when it comes to the digital government. So certainly many things will have to be running in parallel. If I take a recent case, for example, with the business companies registry where they digitized their records, it really was run parallel. So while new application was coming in, those were already being digitized and placed in their record system, while in the back end there was a team that was digitizing the old records. So we need to consider that these things have to be operating parallel, because if we're going to wait until we can digitize all the records, it's going to take us a ministries. I mean, there, for example, the Vital Statistics Unit, which has an entire vault. We still have the Belize Archives that has its own storage unit. I mean, if you go to these places, you'll see the amount of paper that has been used over the past. So digitizing those and using the right equipment to digitize those would also be necessary. But there's nothing stopping us today necessarily to be able to begin to digitize some of the new records that are coming in. But with this is providing the right tools to the respective ministries. So having the right electronic records management system, because digitizing it is one thing, but being able to utilize the information
and share.
And share the information.
Correct.
Exactly. So the same thing with digitalization.
So if you see our bills come around once more with ensuring that data is a public resource that can be used, but it needs to be done within those principles that ensures that there's protection for the citizen.
So what's the next step?
So the next step for us as the e-governance and digitalization unit is as it relates to the bills, is doing a full national educational campaign. We expect to begin that within the month, and it's really to be able to break down these bills so that citizens can understand how it impacts us, so that they can understand their right, and they can also understand how I as a citizen can protect myself, how I as a citizen can be proactive. So we'll be doing a complete educational campaign. We want to partner with multiple entities, both public sector, private sector, the NGOs, because it's a bill that's far-reaching. What we're doing is a system-wide change, and that requires a lot of education and awareness, and we want to do that for a very long period of time. But beyond that, the unit itself, being one of the newest units in government, we are finalizing our national digital agenda, which we hope to do a very public launch. So again, so the citizens can know what we're planning to do for the next couple of years to support you as we continue to move digital, and how we will seek those partnerships with citizens, and how we will involve you in that process.
Marlene, if I could just point out some of the, maybe 5 of the things that we believe are critical to look at. Vital statistics is one, as I keep repeating that. Police records, you know, these are services that every day you see people lining up to get. So the vital statistics, the police records, land application, Alexia talked about the company registry, and the 5th thing that we are saying that we need to ensure that we develop a national digital ID. And all of these things has to feed into that, you know, while simultaneously also working on other ministries like the Ministry of Health and I mean, we are in the pandemic talking about, I know the discussion is on the table on a COVID passport and all of these things. So, but for us, those are some of the 5 key things that we would really want to see looked at and focused as a priority. And while other small projects will be coming, will be happening at the same time, but from our perspective as a government, the vital statistics, the land application, police records, company registry, and getting that national ID.
Definitely. And I think, you know, especially if you remove yourself from thinking of living in an urban area, what it takes if you're coming from a rural area to access these type of documents, it's a matter of equality as well. But Minister, before you leave, just very quickly, let me ask you to wear your Minister of Youth hat for a moment. I know yesterday you were one of several political leaders who spoke out against the recent shooting of BDF Private Jesse Escobar. Let me just get your sentiments this morning.
Marlene, I am still outraged of what I saw, and nobody can change my mind in terms of what I saw on the video. What hurts me most is that this incident occurred in front of a child, a 3-year-old girl, young baby, seeing her father shot to death, murdered, as I will say. Whatever may have caused that irrational decision by that soldier does not warrant the need for such action. I was not there, but what the video shows, it's obviously that there could have been other means of approach. And so I am calling out that we need to ensure that justice is prevailed. I believe that the authorities need to do this in the right manner. Let no stones unturned. That family needs to get justice. There are some other discussions I know that will have to come. The militarizing of the police and all of these things that are other discussions that has to happen to see how we fix this problem. But definitely I'm very much outraged of what happened. That should not happen. Never should have happened. No child, as I said in my post, no child should have ever have to suffer that type of situation. So
right.
I know it's something that is sometimes emotional to talk about, but I want to offer my deepest condolences to that family, and I hope that justice is served.
Well, thank you very much for coming in this morning and for sharing those final words. Definitely quite a bit happening, and we look forward to hearing more about it as your education campaign rolls out as well.
Thank you
Thank
for
you
having
both.
us.
So much
Thank
for
you.
having us.
All right, and with that, we're going to go ahead and take a break. When we come back, we're shifting gears entirely, talking about how you can celebrate Juve at home with your family. So please stay tuned.